Again, welcome everybody. We've got a lot of people on the line today. As always, we've got Peter West here with us, Professor P. And today we're talking firmware 8.5.0.
This is pretty exciting as well. There's a lot. I love it when Peplink releases these major firmware versions because all the community feedback and the feature requests, everything starts to kind of come together from all these special builds and projects that we're working on, and they get all rolled up into these big firmware packages. And it's always really exciting to be able to share all these special projects and case studies and how we have used these features, and Peplink's listening to the community and pushing out hardware, or not hardware, well, they do push out hardware, but pushing out all these features into a major firmware roll up.
Yeah, and I think you really hit the nail on the head. It's like this is all driven by the community, right? People are driving these projects, these needs, and we're driving these new capabilities with carrier partners out there, and so there's just a ton of stuff in here to dig into. I think we're ready to go. We got a lot of people on the line. Thanks everybody for
Yeah.
joining.
Thank you once again, Travis, for hosting. I look forward to my Tuesday Travis time. So it's always kind of fun and start talking about all this stuff and get Peplink's insight on all the stuff that we're working on. I mean, I know Peplink listens, but also you taking the time to kind of like collaborate on, okay, because it's like what I do and my customers and my small niche and my area, but then I get Peplink's feedback and all your involvement with all the other community partners and everything we're doing around the world, and getting some further insight into these technologies and feature sets. So
Yeah, it's always the community.
okay, so 8.5 is launching. We're in RC2 right now. And I've been following this since beta 1, and have been playing around with some of the features. And I always like to show show this if you don't know how to do it. So I'm gonna get out of this mode. So if you're interested in this, you go to In Control. So I'm in my Speed Fusion fleet. And so you can go to Settings, Firmware Policy, and then you can click Show Beta Firmware, scroll down, agree, do not push this out to production. If you're running a large 200 site retail, don't go do this right now. Let us be your guinea pigs and work through this. But all the enthusiasts out there, your labs, your homes, where you're playing around with these features, you click yes and I agree to accept all the risk. And then you'll be able to select the latest beta firmware. But more importantly, you'll be able to, over here on the right-hand side, download the release notes. And so once we have the release notes, we can see everything that's happening here. And it's important on these release notes. Number one, you need to pay attention to the release notes, because if you're using RSIM or the SIM injector, every single firmware update includes a note about the SIM injector associated firmware. There's also notes about which hardware is going to be depreciated, which hardwares are eligible for the next major updates. So you can kind of forecast Peplink's roadmap. Hey, which hardware is not being released in the next major? If this is the last supported firmware for the, whatever, some Peplink router, it's all going to be notated here in the release notes. So you can see here's devices supported by this firmware. And then important notices. The configuration for 8.8.3 or above with firmware 8, it won't work with 8.3. You have to have a configuration for 8.3 or above. So it's not compatible with firmware 8.2 or below. RSIM, if you're using RSIM or the SIM injector, you need to run the new firmware 1137. So you'll download that, update your SIM injector first, then update to the 8.5 firmware. In Control must be enabled for Prime Care for update software features. And then you'll see further major firmware will not be supported on the following models. And so here's our routers. They're being depreciated with this firmware. And that's important to note, especially in your enterprise, or if you have a whole bunch of routers, these routers are being depreciated. So you don't have to go and go, okay, well, which routers are being end of life in the next year or the next quarter? You have it right here. These routers aren't going to be able to sustain any further firmware updates, and that's important to notice. Then if you scroll down, we're gonna get all the new features, and we're gonna go over most of these, so I'm not gonna go over these in the right now. But the but then if we scroll down more, we have improvements. And this is kind of cool. If you download this during the beta stage or the release candidate stage, you can actually see in which firmware release they fixed this. So in RC1, they added CLI support. In RC2, they added API for factory restoring the routers. And so you can see as they're developing these these beta firmwares, you can actually see when these features got added. So once again, if you're an enthusiast, it's kind of fun to see. Once they go into the the GA build or the release build, all of those notes go away and you just basically get all the feature releases. But lots of improvements and fixes. And so if I scroll down, these are all just improvements. That's what I think that was 4 pages of improvements. Then we have resolved issues. And, once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and a half, 12 and a quarter, 12 and a fifth pages. Well, I guess that's 12 because that's just going on there. So 12 pages of improvements from community feedback, bug releases that you've fixed. And you can see right here, fixed in special build S052, special build S101. So if you were part of this, you created this capability, helping us go through these fixes. But 12 pages of fixes. So I highly advise skimming through that if you have time. Okay, let's get to the cool stuff now. What's new in 8.5 that's going to be exciting to talk about? So the first thing is we are improving outbound policies, traffic shaping to the least used algorithm now supports cellular WANs. This has been requested probably for 3 or 4 firmwares now. And it's neat really to see that this got pushed into the 8.5 firmware. So now you can do least used, which has been available for a long time, but only on Ethernet WANs. And then last firmware, they added the VLAN as WAN to least used. They added by uplink. So we got the uplink capability. And now they've added a cellular WAN. So you'll be able to choose your cellular WANs and load balance least used on your cellular WANs. And this is really good if you're traffic shaping across diverse internet connections and you're basically trying to take maximum advantage of all available bandwidth for a large group. I always think when we're talking about getting the most bandwidth out of every circuit, and you're not trying to aggregate for like Teams and Zoom, but you just want your Instagram and your regular internet browsing to be responsive, it's good actually to load balance that. And how you load balance that matters. And so load balancing in combination with bonding actually creates the best end user experience possible. And least used, basically every new session, every new request to the internet, the router says, okay, which internet connection is being used the least right now by either downlink or uplink? They go, oh, cellular 3 is currently being used the least. That request will go out cellular 3. So you're always getting that new thread or that new session happening on the internet connection being utilized the least. And that's a neat feature. And I'm really excited to see that came to the, that is now available on cellular circuits.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Like you said, Peter, you don't have to bond everything, right? And that's kind of people's default is just bond everything and protect it all. And yeah, for bulk internet traffic, an intelligent load balancing algorithm like this is a great way to take advantage of both connections, but also really keep those priority applications for the bonding and the tunneled protection.
100%. And yeah, it's just a great feature. Okay, so next, auto power adjustment and roaming for Wi-Fi. This is awesome. I was actually just doing a competitive project with another manufacturer, and they said, well, our routers will auto tune power. And I reached out to Peplink. I was like, hey, do you anything know about this auto tuning of power? And they go, just wait a second. And then I got the release notes for 8.5. I was like, yes. And I was able to go back to the customer and say, hey, we now have that as well. Currently, this is only available on the router. We hopefully we'll get this on In Control soon. I did reach out to Peplink for feedback on that. And I believe this is being added to the next build of In Control. As you know, In Control also has software versions. So we're on 2.13. And so this feature will be added, but right now it's on the AP controller settings on the router. You can now go to assisted roaming and actually put in the ability to help assist in roaming as devices move around your network. And so it's more efficient roaming for your devices. And so it's a great way to help clients move from it. And you can see right here that say, you know, a conservative is -70 dB, moderate is -65, and aggressive is -55. And so typically the way we used to do this in the past with roaming was that we would have to go in and set the radio settings and set the minimum client threshold. So I'd say minimum client threshold to -71, and that would basically force it to roam over and make a more clean roaming environment. Now you can do this automatically with the assisted roaming feature.
Yeah, this is nice. It just helps, you know, you end up with like APs that are just in a more popular location, and they'll end up with more clients than you know, there'll be a really lightly used one within range oftentimes. And yeah, let's just share the load. And yeah, the power tuning is really powerful too, because I think the Wi-Fi nerds out there know, like, when you've got a whole bunch of Wi-Fi users and APs, more power is a problem, right? You're saturating the airwaves quickly. And so when you can be more intelligent about how much power you
Yep.
use, you don't need to shout loud to somebody who's close. And so it gives you a lot more
Exactly.
efficient use of that airspace.
So a combination of power coverage redundancy and assisted roaming really brings that package together for you and allows you to have a nice roaming environment where you don't have too much power overlap, which gives you better signal, a better channel distribution, and then better roaming. And so it just brings those enterprise features to everybody, basically to the consumer in this case, because Peplink has a lot of consumers that want those enterprise features.
Yeah, enterprise is the word. This is, you know, Peplink's had this enterprise Wi-Fi product line forever, and this just further elevates it into that enterprise feature set with all the other solutions out there.
And on that, if there are enterprise customers watching this, there's no licensing fee for this. It's literally you just go and install 3.9.4 AP firmware and 8.5, and boom, you're done. So it's not like, oh, by the way, you can now have assisted roaming and that's this license fee. Nope. It's just Peplink thought it'd be cool to add, and so they add it, which I just think is really neat the way Peplink does licensing in that fashion.
So the question on the security, the firmware updates, I can
Yep.
take that one.
Perfect.
Peplink has a just stellar track record of providing those critical security features back to these older platforms. And so I don't know what the next vulnerability may be that comes out, but in years past, there were industry-wide like Wi-Fi or SSL types of vulnerabilities. And we went back and created a special point release for these older platforms. And so that's a precedent we set in the past, and I expect we'll maintain that in the future. But that's an example of how we handle those situations. So
yeah,
new products get all the new features and new firmware versions very frequently, and the old depreciated ones will get very infrequent critical updates that will still be relevant for those older hardware platforms as, you know, those situations happen.
I mean, on that, I remember when we were in like firmware 7 and there was a critical security vulnerability, and we released like a 4.5.5 or some ridiculously old firmware to address a secure like a, you know, a critical issue in that firmware. So if there is a critical issue on active devices, they will actually go back and patch those. So you'll still get critical security, but not the regular everyday features and capabilities.
Yep, exactly.
And then two people talked about least used. With least used, it is based on bandwidth. So it's based on available bandwidth. And the reason why you don't do it by number of sessions is because if you have a gigabit circuit, it can handle a whole lot more sessions than a 100 meg, 150 meg Starlink. And so basically it's, you program your circuit speeds on your WAN. So if I'm going to actually show this because I think it's valuable. So I'll go to my backpack here. So on my WAN, I got my Starlink here. I click WAN 1. And right in there, it's actually improperly set up. So I could set this to 25 megabits by 250 megabits. Actually, it's a Starlink Mini, so I could say 10 megs by 100 megs. Set the bandwidth, the MTU to 1500. And basically what least used would do is it'd say, okay, I've got 100 megs available bandwidth on this Starlink. I've got, and so it's going to look at which one percentage usage is less based on the available bandwidth of that circuit. So if you improperly have your circuits defined and then you try to do least use, you might see an improper balance of your availability of your circuit utilization. So distribution, I should say. So you definitely want to program the upload and download bandwidth, and that way the router knows which one is being used the least based on your available bandwidth for each circuit. I'm not going to apply this because I'm actually using this router right now, but I will go back and fix that later. Okay, so both of those are done. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on questions because these are good questions. Someone asked, how do you help clients roam when the decision is made by the is made solely by the client? It's not really made by the client. So the AP and the client are talking to each other. They're basically, especially with the new roaming capabilities like R, and I believe there's K now for roaming assistance. I don't monitor those exactly, but the idea is that the router, the AP, and the client are talking to each other, and so what we're doing is telling the AP, hey, when you're at negative 71 dB, we have a client that's at negative 71 dB. Tell it to switch. Push it over there. Hey, go. Basically, send a signal to it. Tell it to switch to a new AP. So the AP and the client, and the AP does have to support, or the client has to support roaming. So sometimes you'll see clients get disconnected, and you have to turn off roaming if you're running like a really legacy network, because if the client's driver doesn't support roaming, it's not going to work as well as clients that do support roaming technologies features. And so, but it is kind of the AP and the client talking to each other. Okay, we're going to keep going with features. We'll address some of those other questions. I just want to make sure there's. Okay. Yeah, so Wi-Fi. And we'll go next. Improved stability of Wi-Fi mesh connections. This is a combination of 8.5 and 3.9.4. So you want to run cellular Wi-Fi AP firmware 3.9.4 and router firmware 8.5. And I posted on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago. I was working on a mobile setup this with these cases, kind of a mimic, just a reminder for it. But we were rolling out a Wi-Fi mesh network, and the idea was that with the new 8.5 and 3.9.4 firmware, we've got improved stability for mesh detection, as well as the meshing UI has changed to show more information about the mesh. So it shows its neighbors, what the latency is to those neighbors, what the connection capabilities are to those neighbors. And so they're really improving meshing capabilities, which is much needed, especially with all the vendors out there pushing meshing. It's nice to see that Peplink is moving forward with some improved mesh capabilities. I rolled out my very first one running 3.9.4 beta, and it was incredibly successful. The network spun up very quick. The discovery was faster, and so it was able to track those routes better as well. Travis, that's really all I know about the meshing improvements. I don't know if you have any more about that.
I don't. It's just, I think I'm more of a kind of a back end or, background type of improvement on the software and the driver for the mesh algorithms. But yeah, I don't know.
Okay, perfect.
Details on
Yeah,
the end of that.
So, yeah. So, another really cool thing, ignore Starlink obstruction outages for more consistent reliability connectivity. I was doing I don't know if you guys watched me on LinkedIn, but I was out camping and I was playing around with OneWeb and Starlink. I had a Starlink Mini. I'm actually running my Starlink Mini right now. So if there's my Starlink Mini and my BR2. I don't know if that showed up in the video for you guys or if it's just too small, but and I noticed that the connections, I was in between trees and the trees were blocking creating some obstruction as the Starlinks moved across, and it was creating a kind of, I was saying, obstructed and then an outage based on obstruction. And sure enough, loaded 8.5, checked the box, and it showed up. And so I can show you where that is on my router. Give me 1 second. Lost my mouse. So in your Peplink router, you go to network settings, WAN, and where you turn on your Starlink, you edit that option, and you can actually ignore obstruction outages. You just check that box and hit save. And basically what it's going to do is allow recovery quicker. You're still going to have, if there's an obstruction causing loss of data, you're still going to have a blip during that obstruction. What it's not going to do is turn off the WAN. So it's going to keep the WAN up, almost like a persistence for a tolerance to keep it up and running during that obstructed outage. So you'd still have packet loss, which is where FEC and WAN smoothing and bonding come into play, but it's not going to fail the WAN. It's not going to create a whole bunch of up down on the WAN. It's going to keep that more stable for you. A new improvement on the security side of it is we've added NetFlow to the BR2, BR1 Mini series. So BR1 Mini, BR1 Mini 5G, Core, and M2M. NetFlow has really upped Peplink's game in these cybersecurity and traffic monitoring and visibility game space. So we've been able to attract new enterprise customers and security conscious customers with NetFlow and some of our features around that. And that has been expanded to the BR2, BR1 Mini, Mini 5G, Core, and M2M. We have now added filtering access to your network by client type to make quick and easy firewall rules. Client type has been added over the last couple firmware features, and we've added new features around client type. And client type is basically defining the type of client on your network. And so now you can create firewall policies based on client type. So you can say cell phones can't access my servers. That's kind of cool. So you could create firewall types that basically, if someone's coming in with a cell phone or a tablet, it would basically allow or deny that traffic accordingly. And I can't show you, if I go to my router and just go to status, client list, you'll see that there's this type thing right here. And so you can see there's my smartphone, and there's my two laptops, my PCs right there, and they're showing up as desktops. And so in the firewall policies, network or advanced firewall policies, I can add a rule, like an internal rule, and I could say cell phone block, cell phone deny. And I could basically say if the source client type is a cell phone, smartphone, deny that traffic inside my network. So cell phones can go out to the internet, but they can't talk to my servers or talk between VLANs. So this is just a very simple example of this. But under client type, there's a bunch of client types, like printers. So you could create, hey, allow printers, but block cell phones, and so e-readers, smartwatches, audio video, by the way, that's TVs. So your smart TVs, things like that. VoIP, and then unclassified. So if it's an unknown device, but you can see servers, network appliances. There's all these different client types, and you can actually create firewall rules based on type of device. And I think there's a really cool use case for that. Travis, I don't know if you have any specific use cases that you'd want to build upon that, but it's definitely neat the way they're adding that to outbound policies, now firewall policies.
Yeah, I think you've got a lot of scenarios where there's like public networks or even guest networks or just like keeping your kids' devices. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways people will use that creatively, both in business and more personal environments. But yeah, I don't have a personal story of how I've used that yet. I just love seeing, it's just helpful for me just seeing the client type on the list as, I look like if I see a device chewing through bandwidth, it's really helpful to just see that icon and know like, oh, this is a phone. Somebody's watching a video. Okay.
Someone's sucking up all my video,
Yeah,
watching
exactly.
Instagram reels. Yeah, definitely. Someone asked about Starlink obstruction, why it's not always enabled. You don't always want it enabled. If I'm being obstructed, and I have other means of internet, that are more stable at the time, I might want it to turn it off instead of having the packet loss associated with the obstruction. And so it depends on what type of traffic you're handling and how you want that to be handled. So some users might want it to turn off that WAN and instead use the other sources of internet. Some users might say, hey, all I have is Starlink, keep it up and running, don't turn it off. And that's really where that's at. It's, do I want it enabled or disabled based on my available internet sources?
Yeah, I think the thing there is like Starlink's terminal is at some point deciding at some threshold I'm obstructed, and that threshold may be bouncing up and down quickly, and instead of just assuming that that is really down, you might be able to get a few more packets out than the terminal's threshold would normally let you, so you can kind of
Or the
cheat it.
recovery.
Yeah. Yep.
Or the recovery time when it does go down. It goes down and you have to wait for it to recover.
Yep.
And so it just speeds up recovery. But that's also, if it is down and then you're waiting for it to recover, if you don't have any other internet, that's a big outage. If you have other internet, not unless it's not that big of a deal. Let it fail and then let it come up healthy. And so it's not a big deal.
Exactly.
Apple and Google's private Wi-Fi. So it says, how does this work with Apple's private Wi-Fi? That's actually an outbound tunnel. So private Wi-Fi, like from Google or Apple, they're actually creating like a tunnel and then tunneling you out. So the device on the network is still the same, and that would still apply even to when you have the random MAC addresses. All it does is privatize your device. It doesn't say that's not a smartphone. And so the randomized MAC addresses still show up as smartphones, just not your smartphone every single time. It's a private MAC address. So private Wi-Fi is an outbound setting, which actually you could block with this tech firewall feature. You could block, hey, if it's a cell phone, block IPsec, and now private Wi-Fi won't work anyways. But the idea is that you're identifying the client, not the data path, which is actually more beneficial to you. It's I don't know. Someone asked, how do you know the client type? I'm assuming it's based on MAC address, is my guess. If you use MAC spoofing, it would probably, because every MAC address is basically has the first set of characters or actually the hardware identifier. That's how they know, hey, this is a Peplink, or this is a Netgear, or this is a Cisco. So you have like Samsung and Apple and etc. And so those first digits are the hardware identifier, and then the last set of digits are basically the unique device identifier. Like this, that's Peter's MAC iPhone or whatever. And so they're probably using the first octet with a database against vendors to associate client type, is my guess. A good hacker could probably just change the MAC address on their device and circumvent it. That's why you should have other security policies in place, but it mitigates the people that are just screwing around on your network, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's simple ways to categorize devices when you might not have another way to do it. And like you said, it's not going to be the end-all be-all security policy for really critical stuff, but it's definitely a huge convenience feature for these mixed user types of environments.
Paul asked if NetFlow will be on other devices. NetFlow is already on other devices. It's very popular. We've added it to these devices in 8.5 firmware. So all of our enterprise routers already have NetFlow support. We've just added it to the BR1 Mini and BR2 for increased capabilities.
It's just hard to squeeze them into those smaller ones, I think, is what happened there. We got there.
This is just showing you what I already showed you, so you can see. And you can actually change the client type as well of a device. So if you're under the client list, you can click on client type and you have detect on it and then custom, and so you can change it. So if it does come unknown, you can actually change the client type of a device. So if a device is being improperly categorized, you can change that. So if I go to my router, go to status, client list, I can say this Surface Pro, I can click on this, detect automatically, or I could say custom, and I could change this to something else, like IoT, for example. And then that MAC address then would be associated to IoT instead of a desktop. Kind of cool feature there. Receive GNS and NEMA messages for your GPS perfect user, always on the go. We have GPS receiver capabilities now, meaning you can receive GPS signals on non-GPS routers. So if you have a GPS device and you have a non-GPS router, in other words, a router without a cellular modem, we now have the GPS receiver capabilities that you pull in GPS streams. So kind of a cool feature for more advanced users that are trying to track. I could see this being used in enterprise mobility, where you maybe are using like an SDX router or like an EPX or something where you don't have that cellular modem built in. Enhanced security. This actually has been a request a long time by a couple of our enterprise customers. They released it in a special build in 8.4.1, and it's really nice to see that this is 8.5 release. We now have 802.1x on our wired LAN ports of a lot of our routers. Smaller routers. So we've added this support to the BR2, BR1 Mini, BR1 Mini 5G core and M2M. We did already have this in 8.4.1 on the MPX and SDX, I believe. And so basically we now have 802.1x radius security. So this is port-based security. It already worked on our switches. It's been there for a long time. We've now added it to the switch ports on routers that support this, basically have managed LAN port capability. And so it's a great feature addition for the highly security. Oh, I got a hiccup. Sorry. The highly secure conscious. Basically what this does is you can click on an Ethernet port, enable port-based security, and you'll see that authentication method. So when you click on an Ethernet port, you now have authentication methods. So you add a radius server under radius servers here on the left-hand side. So under advanced miscellaneous settings radius server, 802.1x authentication, you'll set it up. Then when you go to your network port settings, you click on a port, and you're going to have the ability to do port-based authentication or security. This is a big deal for enterprise clients, healthcare customers that are basically deploying these out in the field and need to make sure they have guaranteed who's ever plugging into this network is secure and has access to the network. If you want to play around with this, you can actually spin up a Docker image with a free radius and tap it into that, or spin up a free radius server, ISO, like a virtual machine somewhere, and then play around with free radius and authenticate against the radius server. But it's a great way to make sure that you know every single device that's plugging into your network. And this pairs perfectly with WPA Enterprise radius authentication. So now you have that same radius server can secure your Wi-Fi, which we've had for a long, long time, now secures your Ethernet ports. So you have 4 different mechanisms here. Forced authorization. The port is set to authorized state, allowing network access. So basically you're forcing authorized. So this is if you need to bypass it for like a printer or something else. Port-based 802.1x. Single auth 802.1x. This method is port-based, but authenticates only one connected device per port. Port-based allows you to do, basically it authorizes the port. And then single auth MAC-based. This is a method, authenticates a single device based on its MAC address. The same username and password are both the MAC address in lowercase format without any delimiters. And basically it allows you to restrict it by a MAC address and username and password. It's really cool added feature for the secure conscious there. And you'll see that when you plug in your PC to the network, you're going to have to enable 802.1x authentication. And once you do that on that connection, it will then prompt you for username and password. And you can see here, oh, this is a new feature, sorry. Enhanced data reports for SFP. This is an enterprise request, basically letting us know what type of SFP has been plugged into a Peplink router that supports SFPs. So this is actually a CLI feature. I was told this will be coming to GUI later. But basically you can now see WAN 3, SFP1, and we can actually get the details of that. So you're gonna get the identifier that it's connected. So a lot of times when you're doing enterprise authenticate or enterprise networks, you want to see vendors and what's being connected to your ports. And so we've added the ability to actually read the transceivers that are plugged into your SFP. If this is a confusing to you, don't worry about it. It's not for you. If you are an enterprise customer that plays around with SFPs and 10 gigabit, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. And this is a greatly requested feature for troubleshooting enterprise networks with a lot of transceivers and different kinds of transceivers on the network. Enhanced DHCP control. We've added DHCP range reservations. This has also been a heavily enterprise requested feature, which basically lets you do range exclusions on your DHCP server. So say you have a DHCP server and it's going to do, you have 192.168.50.10 to 250, but then you need to exclude range 60 to 70 and 100 to 150. You can now do that right here. So you can have a bigger scope range and then exclude smaller ranges. What we used to do in the past for this prior to 8.5 is put in a whole bunch of fake MAC addresses and exclude those IPs manually. This saves everybody in the enterprise space or business space that needs to exclude ranges of IPs. This is a huge time saver for us in the DHCP world. Enhanced BGP route control. Once again, another enterprise feature. I'd say 99.999% of our customers aren't playing around with BGP. However, those of you that are, one of the things that we wanted to do was custom route advertising, 0.0.0. In other words, the default gateway. And so basically the default traffic routes through me. So in a BGP world, if you can advertise out, you're saying, hey, I'm the gateway. And you can have another DHCP, another router that can also take the status of that gateway. So you can have two routers advertising default path. And so in BGP, we want to be able to do that. It was missing from our previous firmware builds, and we've added it to 8.5. This comes with a very special request from some of our one of our enterprise sporting events. We had a special build and pushed it out to 8.5 firmware for them. Manage all of your Docker straight from in control. This has been requested ever since we announced Docker. I think the day we announced Docker, people kept saying, hey, when can we get this in control? And we're like, yeah, soon. So it's very proud to announce that if you are using Peplink for edge compute and Docker, we can now manage Docker via script files right inside in control. Basically, if we go to in control settings, Docker management right here on your group settings, you can now create scripts, push that out, and you can see which routers have received that script and handle the Docker management right here. And so if you need help with that, I would definitely reach out to someone that's familiar with Docker for this capability. But it is definitely super nice to see that we can now centrally manage pushing of Docker. So imagine previously, if you had a Docker image for an edge solution, even like say you want to do a DNS over SSL or encrypted DNS, you'd have to log into every single one of your BR2s and push this out. Now you can literally just create a script that says, hey, here's my Docker image, here's my settings for it, push it to all my BR2s. And now you can push this to thousands of devices in a matter of seconds. So great little feature there. I will add that will consume bandwidth. If you're downloading a 2 gigabyte Ubuntu base image and you push out to 2,000 routers, that's a lot of data you just used on your data plan. So do pay attention to how you're pushing Docker out on scripts, because I was playing around with Docker with a friend at an RV park, and we were building images, and we sucked up like 100+ gigabytes of data in a matter of like an hour and a half. And so I was like, so I got an alert from my AT&T and an alert from Starlink saying, hey, by the way, you're out of data. So be careful. Docker images, just because it's a small little kilobit script file does not mean the image that it's downloading is kilobits. And you will suck up data faster than you can imagine if you're pushing out multiple scripts to a whole bunch of devices. And you can see here, you can upload scripts, then apply those scripts. And so you can see right there, select a script. So once you upload a script, you can then apply those scripts to these routers And then you'll see in the event log that it ran the script accordingly. You can see the Docker logs right there. Another option is to add enable or disable Bluetooth in the B1 plus 5G. So in the B1 series routers, you can now enable and disable Bluetooth. So that's a new feature that they've added for security conscious. Once again, if you want to turn off that Bluetooth access. Multiple IP pass-through. This has been asked ever since we started multiple cellular routers. I cannot believe this took as long as it took, but it's really neat to see that it's now available. I mean, I remember like the first HD4 and people go, hey, can I have multiple pass through? And it was like, oh no, you need the BR1, buy 4 BR1s. That is no longer the case. Now you can do VLAN based multiple IP pass through. So basically you create 2 VLANs, select IP pass through, and you'll be able to push cellular 1 to VLAN 1, cellular 2 to VLAN 2, and the first DHCP device on that VLAN will get that pass through IP address. So it's a great way to do that, and I'm very happy that Peplink has added this to 8.5. If you use IP pass through for your firewall or for your networks, this is really good if you're putting a Peplink router in front of another firewall, especially one that supports multiple interfaces. You can literally have 2 interfaces, plug those 2 interfaces into the Peplink, the BR1 or BR2, have the BR2 VLAN 1 and VLAN 3, and then basically pass through that down. And now your firewall that doesn't have cellular capability has dual 5G modems. So another new feature that was added, kind of going to that GPS receiver that we talked about earlier. Now, if your device doesn't have GPS and you're utilizing Starlink's GPS data to supplement your data on IC2, this will be automatic. There's no necessary features. So basically, if you have Starlink plugged into a WAN, there's no GPS on the synergized device. That then gets pushed over, and now you have GPS capabilities on your router. And so you'll be able to pull in GPS from Starlink's GPS data to supplement your data on IC2. So it's sort of an automatic feature. It's used if there is no GPS and it needs it. I have not been able to play with this because everything I have has GPS. I mean, BR2s and BR1 Pro 5Gs and MBXs. So if you have used this or know about this, I'd love to hear about that. Other new features and improvements, Docker support for log driver and log opt options. Once again, if you're a developer and you're using Edge, we've added those log driver and log option features for you. Wi-Fi WAN now supports 802.11k and 802.11v standards. This is better roaming connectivity between APs, and also supports K has that VLAN capability. So it's going to give you better support for roaming and VLAN support as a WAN. T-Mobile in the US, T-Mobile and Verizon eSIMs can now be activated without a matching ID. This simplifies the eSIM deployment process. So far, it's still not great when you're working with vendors with the 3 big carriers for eSIMs, but it's getting better. So I'm not going to answer a whole bunch of questions on eSIMs on this video. This is more about features, but we have had good success pushing out eSIMs on specific plans, and I think the plan matters when you're talking about eSIMs on the routers. And now you can activate and manage eSIMs through Synergy mode. So if you have Synergy mode SIM cards or modems, like a SDX with an HD1 dome, you can now manage eSIMs through the Synergy mode controller. So we've added that as well. The biggest thing is look at that data sheet. That data sheet has a whole plethora of improvements and fixes and patches and new features to help make sure that you're running a stable and reliable network. And once again, please wait until we're general availability. If you're running this, if you only have one Peplink and it's in your production environment, don't go in tonight and push 8.5 because you see a feature there that you want to play with. Wait until it's GA, or reach out to your local partner reseller and pick up a little B1, right? I mean, pick up a B1, use it in your lab, use it for testing these features and capabilities. We will open the remainder time for Q&A, so I'm just going to scan through real fast and just start answering questions, top to bottom, if that's okay with everybody. So any failover based on latency? We don't have failover based on latency. That's what dynamic weighted bonding is trying to do, is basically mitigate latency. But we don't, because latency is based on destination. So you don't want to fail a WAN based on one destination, because you might have great latency. I mean, that's where BGP and these technologies try to mitigate that. But the idea is that you don't want to fail over because your latency to a European web server is slow if you're in the US, and the latency to somewhere else is good. But if you're using speed fusion, you can mitigate latency using WAN smoothing and things like that. I know that's about PPS equivalent signal SSID. We did talk about this. We don't support PPSK on our SSIDs right now. It's currently we've created as a client, we now support it, but it's not on our APs yet. Chris asked a really good question about cellular connections. Cellular connections are definitely variable. I consider those what I call an access network. Basically, you're paying for the right to use their network, and you could get 600, 700, 800 megabits, or you get 3 megabits or none. And so they are dynamic, which is why least used has been challenging on dynamic protocols in the past. So we're trying to always combat that, and just doing the best we can to adjust dynamically. Dynamic weighted bonding has taken great strides in adapting to variability of cellular throughput. And we've even offered the ability to add cellular bandwidth capability. So I think 8.3 offered the ability now you can add cellular bandwidth throughput to the circuit to improve the calculation process. And so I will say that it is, if you know in your area you're getting between 30 and 80 megabits per second of cellular download throughput, put an 80 there. It's not going to throttle you. It's just telling the router, hey, this is sort of what I'm expecting to see. But if you're in downtown San Francisco and you're getting 850 megabits per second, I mean, good for you. Most people in rural areas are seeing, 50 to 250 megabits per second. And so you could throw that in there if you know what you're getting. And so we've added that bandwidth capability in 8.3 to help identify or help maximize calculations. But dynamic weighted bonding has done great strides as well. And once again, bandwidth and throughput is highly variable, and so it can go one way or the other. And so we're just adapting the best we can to that variability. Travis, I don't know if you have any further to say about that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what the update on the least used algorithm is trying to get at, is doing a better job of estimating that in a lightly. There's always this balance of like, do we speed test the WAN or not, right? And no is basically the answer, right? That people want things to be based on speed all the time, but we just don't know minute to minute, second to second, and it's not efficient or helpful to speed test each cellular WAN over and over. So that's, I think, what the update is trying to do, is do a better job of estimating those real-time cellular connection bandwidths dynamically and as those sessions are established.
Power coverage rate redundancy was asked. How does that work? Basically, if you have two APs, and you do need at least two APs for it to do this, but they basically are signaling each other, and then they're going to adjust their power based on their overlap. So basically the APs talk to each other and then adjust their power so they're not overlapping too much. And so if you only have one AP, automatic power adjustment's not really going to make any difference because it has nothing to talk to. But if you have multiple APs, it's a great way to prevent the overlap of those signals too much. Somebody asked why you need GPS. What's it used for? It's a lot. The GPS is used for fleet management, first responders, government. We use it all the time for our tracking. It's also used great for reports. If you haven't seen some of the amazing reports that Peplink pulls based on based on GPS. So if I go to my router, this is just a really neat use of a few minutes of time. So I've got my fleet right here. This is my Speed Fusion fleet. I got my backpack. Blake has his backpack. We have our vehicles. So I'm in a car right now. So I've got my backpack and my Starlink Mini. So there it is. I can click on my backpack, and there's my Starlink and my T-Mobile and my AT&T. I can go to reports, and I go to WAN quality reports. And here I can pull up my WANs, and so there's my T-Mobile, my Verizon, AT&T, and my WAN 1. So I can pull up T-Mobile, I can pull up all, and I can actually see a heat map of me driving this morning. So I woke up wherever this is this morning, and I drove up to where I am right now, and you can see my path. This is the GPS providing this detail, and then I get a heat map of T-Mobile as I was driving up the interstate there, the back roads. I can swap over to Verizon, AT&T, and I can see Verizon, AT&T, and see their map. And you can see that's actually worse than the T-Mobile one. And then I can pull up WAN 1, which is connected to my Starlink. Now it's not going to give me signal, but it's going to give me my ups and downs. So how stable was Starlink throughout this trip? And then here you can see all my ups and downs as I was going under bridges and things like that. And so here's my driving this morning using GPS, tracking my Starlink connection. Here's my latency. Here's my ups and downs as I was traveling around. And I will, in Starlink's defense, that is my Starlink. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's just in my window. And it's a Starlink Mini. So it's not, it's not mounted to the roof, and it's not a, so it's just getting very limited throughput or limited visibility to the sky. And then if I pull up my T-Mobile again, you can see how many times it disconnected as well. And so using GPS just for my own information, I'm able to see disconnects, drops of the circuit. I'm able to see my latency, and I'm able to see the throughput and quality. So it's a great way to troubleshoot the capabilities of a network where you're at. On top of that, if I go back to my device details, GPS provides me real-time analytics on what I'm doing. So I can pull up this map, and this is me right now. I'm sitting in a parking lot right there, being safe, obviously doing my meeting. And so GPS provides amazing capabilities to see what you're doing, where your fleet is, what's happening in the network. And so you can see there's my drive today and where I went, and I'm able to see that right there. So really, really nice features and capabilities, whether you're using it for your personal use just to see how good your internet has been, or if you're using it as an IT person to troubleshoot your fleet. I use it for that purpose. I use it to troubleshoot my fleet all the time. And so it's a great capability there. For NetFlow server, I don't want to recommend a specific solution, but I do have a video called Adaptive Responsive on my YouTube channel. And someone asked if I have a recommendation for a NetFlow server, and there's a company out there that does some pretty cool stuff with NetFlow. But basically, any SIEM is going to be able to take NetFlow data and parse it in a way that generates reports for you. But on the YouTube channel, I don't want to specifically endorse a specific one, if that's okay. But there are lots of really cool features and capabilities out there for NetFlow. And so if we did not answer your questions, it's not that we didn't want to. It's that we either didn't have enough time, or maybe it was out of scope, or troubleshooting, which we want to avoid troubleshooting because we're talking about features. Please feel free to email us, Travis@peplink.com or PeterW@peplink.com. And so you can email PeterW@peplink.com or Travis@peplink.com, and we'd be more than happy to answer any additional questions or get you in contact with the right partner or resource to answer those questions for you. And thank you so much for your time today, and I hope these features you find valuable. And if you have any feedback, please email us or let us know. And if you have any recommendations, something you'd like to learn about, if there's a particular feature you'd like us to have on the series, please send us that feedback, and we'll review that for the next videos.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, Peter, as always.
Have a good one.
All right. Take care, folks.